Welcome to Breakpoint, everyone. The topic for today is DevSecOps for teams building on steroids. Every product environment is different. It could be highly diverse, complex, and in some cases, highly dynamic, with far too many features being built very, very fast. Security teams can often slip into the typical notion of shifting left, whereby we end up creating too many checkpoints and slowing it down for everyone, including the engineering teams and the business teams. There can be many effective out-of-the-box approaches to tackle such scenarios. To discuss some of these, we have Akash with us today. Akash Mahajan, founder and CEO of Kloudle and Appsecco. He, along with his teams at Appsecco, has helped numerous organizations with breaking and fixing their applications. And now at Kloudle, he works towards cloud security automation and to eliminate human errors in setting up and using cloud infrastructure. Hi, I'm Neelu, a technical security enthusiast and your host. I welcome you to the Breakpoint Security Podcast. In this podcast, we'll explore the depths of defensive security. We learn the methods and techniques that the smart security teams are using to solve practical security challenges today and innovate their way into the future. Welcome to the show, Akash.
Thank you for having me, Neelu. It's really good to be here. I'm very excited. Looking forward to our chat.
Great, thank you. So we will touch upon the topic a little bit, first of all, for our audience. So from a security perspective, we are generally focused on finding vulnerabilities, right? And the idea is to fix these and do that as early as possible, which is technically correct. So, and I think I will also not fall short of saying that as security folks and security teams, we are high on detection, like detection actually gives us a high. But jokes apart, one of the reasons that we keep trying to detect this is so that we can fix these issues early on. And that is the reason why we create these checkpoints in the development lifecycle itself. And that will help us detect all of these gaps in the code, in the security issues. Now, life cycles today are not waterfall anymore. I think they are in some places, but largely are agile, and the sprints are reducing in timelines. Even 1 to 2 weeks could be the duration of a sprint. Now, in such a scenario, every checkpoint that we as security teams are creating, even if it's automated, it comes with a cost. And when this is overdone, these controls are often either bypassed by the developers, or in some cases, even the risks are accepted by the business. And there are many other such indicators that tells us that it is not just annoying for the engineering teams, but it's not working. Maybe it's not as effective, and it might actually be slowing things down. Now, while all of us in the industry have been talking about shift left, in short, you have a contrarian viewpoint. So what has been your experience on this, and why do you say that this typical approach does not work?
So I'll start with answering like why it doesn't work. Fundamentally, when we prescribe that, hey, I found a problem, go fix it, we're expecting a change. And unfortunately, developers are not likely to change anytime soon. That's human nature, right? Nobody likes to be told what to do. The way to success is to make sure that checkpoints are in a place that developers don't have to change, but things get done. But why are we in this situation is because imagine the last decade of application security has evolved from a place of that there is a certain requirement, then we will plan ahead the features, what will get released, and we do it in 15 days, like a sprint, or 3 months, 6 months, it doesn't really matter, right? But the idea and the theory of and the implementation of security has come from that hey, we need these controls, and the sooner we find issues, cheaper it is. But the place and the way businesses operate completely has transformed. 10 years ago, cloud was, for early adopters, public cloud, but now it's for everyone, which means that not only application code can be deployed, a new server can be set up with automation, right? So businesses figured out that the time to market has to shorten. And that is where, when checkpoints become kind of like bottlenecks, they slow everyone down. It is usually not acceptable in a certain kind of company. If you're a large enterprise serving large customers in a regulated industry, nothing much has changed for you. But if you are, trying to outdo your competition in an emerging area like a ed tech or something, then getting your feature out in production is what your developer is being incentivized for, right? And that's where this gap, the cadence gap that comes in.
Yeah, I think I see where you're going with this. But I want to actually touch upon the other aspect, right? We often, when we are talking about DevSecOps and things like that, we often tend to go to the AppSec side too much. And in the context of, and when you're talking about teams that are building on steroids, right? That's what we are talking about today. Essentially, the velocity is really high. It means there are rapid releases, too many deployments happening. And sometimes I like to give this analogy of, time moving really fast when you're, I think that was in Interstellar, if anyone has watched it, is time moves really fast when you're closer to the black hole.
Yeah.
And having done development myself, when you're closer to a release, it's a different ballgame altogether. And when you're doing things in terms of security in the normal timelines, suddenly a lot of things change when you are reaching or nearing that delivery timeline, right? And if there are multiple releases, then you are reaching that timeline pretty often.
Yep.
So just like the laws of physics break down, I think a lot of things change in that case. Now, when you're dealing with such high deployment frequencies as a security team, there can be many challenges, which may not necessarily be just applications, like I was saying. Few that I can easily think of are, for example, there are many new containers, infra workloads being provisioned from time to time, and that you're not just looking into the code at that time, you're also, as a security team, looking at how do I secure all of these?
Yeah.
And you obviously now want to ensure security of this infra, and also ensure that everything from not just identifying vulnerability, but vulnerability management and detection, but also patching is taken care of.
Yeah.
Now that has been a touchy subject. So how do you think security teams can take care of patch management at such high speeds?
There are some standard strategies anyways, right? And Martin Fowler has written about them, that how you can do releases in a manner where you can switch between a new release and old release. And if you are able to switch between new and old, you have prepared the new in a way that the infra is patched, right? If we are still talking about deploying to standard servers, virtual machines, right? But the moment you say that I'm going to mostly deploy to a container or a containerized workload, then your container itself has its own configuration file, right? And in the past, the big challenge with staging a dev test, UAT staging prod environment tended to be that the environment may be different. It could be in the developer's laptop, and similar had to be in staging, similar had to be in prod, and obviously prod gets the most cores and amount of RAM, right? That's expensive. But once you move to like a containerized way of working, and let's say most of us use Docker, then the fundamental infra remains the same. But the developer laptop may not have enough cores or enough RAM, but that's immaterial, right? And that point, there is no reason to do inline patching. I mean, well, there are enough security products making millions of dollars doing that for compliance reasons. But the secret mantra there, or the not so secret mantra there, is to do immutable infrastructure, which is like you replace the infra, you bake the code and the configuration in the new infra when you do your thing. And that is a very powerful motivator for people the motivator being reduce the burden of patch management, right? So that you're still compliant with whatever you want to be compliant with, PCI or something, while letting developers actually, get the velocity that they need, right? Fundamentally, the reason the velocity exists is because the moment you are racing to release features because the business demands it, mostly business has made some promises and guarantees to end customers, to marketing. Maybe they have something else linked to that. Like I worked with an edtech and they were big sponsors of sporting events, right? In that sense, the live event will happen when it'll happen. So you can't really not ship the feature because, security said so.
Because
So,
it's raining.
yeah, all of that, right? So being able to understand that, hey, let's transform our infra. Why? Because the burden of patch management is just going to become worse, right? And why is that burden increasing? Because imagine a scenario where you had a procurement team and an IT team used to work closely with them, and you would say, I'm buying 10 Dell servers, right? And first I will onboard them, I will name them, tag them, and I will set up the OS and golden image and all that. But now where is the image? The image is being provided by a cloud provider, right? You're trusting the provider to give you the image. And it's very easy to align the same version, the same runtime, all of that in the developer laptop, all the way to whatever your production infra is going to be, right? And if it is solved, you can do high velocity deployment. If this is not solved, then you're dealt with, you're dealing with like crazy troubleshooting of production while new code is still being deployed. So at no point do you know that, hey, is this a new bug I'm solving? Or is this an old bug in a new place? Or, it's just like a mess. And that burns people out eventually.
Yeah, I think very well explained. And that could be a problem that you would keep going back to in a time when you don't have the time for it. Okay. So I think, this is definitely something that the teams can take up and do, but there was this aspect of vulnerability detection and the checkpoints. I'm coming back to it once again, because while we deal with the patch management and the infra side of things, there are still some areas which are very high on detection have traditionally been. And for example, vulnerability, we might say that, okay, detection and patching can be done in this out of the box fashion, and the approach can be different. Things like detecting secrets, right? And secrets is one of my favorite areas. So I wanted to know from you, what would you do differently? Things like secrets management or secrets detection are very high on having checkpoints, particularly in a very dynamic and ad hoc environment, which is true for many of us who are developing and scaling today. What would you do differently in such an environment to particularly tackle secrets when you're scaling fast?
So before I, answer that question, there is a promise that DevOps brought for businesses, right? Not IT, but businesses, that you could have the factory model of shipping features, right? Which means there's an assembly line, right? There was a time when the assembly line for staging was different and for prod was different, right? So it's almost like you have crafted whatever you're making and it is ready with like staging data. And at the time of some, approval process, a human will say that, yeah, now it's ready for prod. And when it is sent on the prod assembly line, that is when it will get the production data, right? You can apply the same principle here, right?
Okay.
First of all, developers mostly now do their testing on prod, right? For the teams that have to move fast. Now, some people say, no, we don't do that. I understand. Then you are in a regulated industry, right? Then you're not really solving it how majority of the world is solving. And if you are testing in prod, they don't really differentiate between a functional test case and a non-functional test case around security, right? Because developers are being incentivized to ship features, time to market. In that case, the only useful intervention, right, that a security team can do in prescriptive nature is they give them a guide that this is where you put your secrets. Could be a configuration file, could be like runtime injection as like an environment variable. But whatever it is, that best practice has to be enforced. Then the burden of checking where the secret is and if something sensitive is going to get deployed in production, right? That comes on IT. But if we do the prep work, and can you do it on day one? No, you have to work with the developers, but that's the whole point of DevOps, right? Break down the silos. So if you do it like that, then whatever is the ideal best practice for that team, org, whosoever, whatever that organization is, on that you can put some controls, detection after the fact, pre-commit hooks, whatever developers are okay with. And if the development leadership, the engineering leadership is with you, then it's very useful for them to even say that, yeah, this is part of our coding standard, which everyone aspires for, right? The engineering teams really understand that we should always try and have consistent coding standards. That's one. This is the part where you are kind of changing the hearts and minds, right? But to be sure that secrets do not get leaked to production, the only sure shot way is to have different secrets. And since we are deploying using assembly line, CI/CD pipeline, the secrets for production should never be provided by developers. Either they don't have access to it, or ideal cases like you have something which is generating the secrets, no human is ever looking at it, and that will just solve your rotation as well, right? You can kind of do any workflow around rotation, revocation that your compliance demands. But step one is to make sure detection is powerful by making it very, very specific, because the teams understand that, right? And step two is to make sure you completely isolate or eliminate the potential leakage, that there is a coding standard, it was being enforced, but someone still bypassed it, something still got hard-coded, ended up being in this thing. And I'll give you a couple of examples where it really, really happens. Even now, people build applications for the backend API, and now you have that backend as service where front end is made as single page app. A lot of front end developers have no idea that when they package their secrets, those secrets are just in some JavaScript file, like a main.js, right? That's one. Sometimes teams are like, using this front end, we are going to generate a mobile app. Or using this front end, we are going to generate a progressive web app, because they appear to be more interactive, more fluid for the end customer, the UI UX bit, right? If those front end folks don't know, or if you outsource your front end, which happens to a lot of teams, then this bit can break. And which is why it's really, really critical that the staging secrets or the dev test secrets are different for devs, and they never really get to see the production secrets. It's doable. It's absolutely doable, because you control the pipeline.
That is totally doable. I mean, in fact, I was waiting for you to come to that part. Many times in security, we would, go with the idea of preventing it altogether. It was also there in one of our previous episodes where we're talking about secrets management.
Okay.
Where you should actually not be handling secrets, leave alone handling it securely and that ways. But since we are talking about security coming in at the time where deployments are now already happening fast, and they may not have this kind of a control in place. What I understand from what you're saying is still go with detection using the approaches that you mentioned, but try and soon move into something where you prevent this altogether from happening. Do you think that the cloud native solutions are good in some way, or should be leveraged, like for example secrets managers and things like that, from the get-go when they're starting off? Is that any better to be able to help with speed?
Absolutely. To get started, there is no point in doing anything. I know many teams that end up deploying like a HashiCorp vault in like a 3 cluster high availability manner, which I think is an overkill for most people. You should start with whatever you don't have to manage. And the cloud native secret managers tend to be expensive, so people try to optimize there. But usually there's always another service in AWS. It's called like a param store, which is part of the SSM, which allows for encrypted things to be kept, but is not as expensive as the AWS Secrets Manager. Right?
Okay.
Fundamentally, you need a place where encryption will happen at rest. You will have an API to be able to interact with it, and you won't have to manage it. Because if you're not managing it, nobody's waking you up at 4 a.m. saying that, hey, pipeline is failing because the secret is not getting injected. Go fix that infra, right? You should not create more infra debt to support your security use cases as part of that. Because then it's like, right, like in encryption, the master key is always plain text. So there's a lot of effort done to make sure that the master key is never exposed. And it's called turtles all the way down. Like some people say, no, but let's encrypt that master key. So to encrypt the master key, there'll be a master key. So,
that's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. I think it's an understandable, out of the box approach when your teams are building at that speed. However,
the best part is, developers may have their own way of managing secrets, but in the pipeline, the IT doesn't have to follow that, right? When they're baking stuff for prod, they can just choose what's appropriate for them.
Yeah, I think this is actually not. So I think traditionally, because we don't think of it that way, we actually end up, having. Now I see the point that you're bringing in, and this is out of the box when it comes to teams which are deploying pretty fast.
So I have another aside to it, right? One of the objections I've heard is no. Sometimes the production secrets can only come from business executives. For example, any mid-market or enterprise which is implementing Salesforce through a third-party implementation partner, they will get an API key. That doesn't come to an IT person, right? Okay. That comes from the implementation partner, and they are usually not very good at handling any kind of secret. Forget that API key being so sensitive, right? And I've had to deal with incident response in a couple of times in such cases. And if Salesforce is leaked, usually basically sales data is leaked, customer lists are leaked, which is fairly bad for most businesses. Yeah. Right. So I've heard this objection, and we were able to solve this in Byjus by implementing a particular product called 1Password. So 1Password is an enterprise secrets manager. Yeah. It's built completely for humans, but it has a connector for working with servers, which means you can have a human add a secret, which on a machine or the pipeline can be read if the pipeline has the appropriate access, right? And the human can keep changing, and whenever the product is baked, right, the secret is refreshed, right? So it's like when you're rotating a secret, you're basically making a new release. And nothing could be more elegant than that, right? Because all the alerting and every notification that you get with the releases, you get that by default. And I think my understanding is that 1Password released that connector because this was a demand from the industry, right? So some companies have tried to solve it at that level as well.
I think it's a very practical use case, actually. If you look at it, and being a practitioner, I have seen this at various times at different stages of development, right? And especially when things are fast, the secrets are literally in the air. It's always better to have a human interface, because if you do not have something like this,
then they'll bypass it.
They will bypass in the sense they'll start putting it in the chats, putting it in Slack, sharing through something WhatsApp, or the other. It's better to facilitate that in a secure fashion rather than, expecting that from developers. So, this works well for a lot of things that we've been talking until now, works well for teams. We've been in the context of essentially a limited set of teams which are deploying very fast. What I now want to actually do is flip this scenario around and ask you that, and in the interest of many other organizations today, where, we have not just teams moving at this speed, but we also have teams growing. We have not just features getting added, we have multiple suites of products getting added, right? So there's a lot going on in these organizations, and these challenges actually multiply then. It's no more a problem of just speed, it is speed at scale.
Yep.
Right. So how do you deal with these same issues when the organization is scaling, but does not want to compromise with the speed. And I'm particularly talking about not just the technical aspects, that there are a lot of operational challenges also when they are getting to that scale and while they want to keep that speed intact. So how do you suggest the security and engineering teams approach that? Because there is a certain standard approach that we have for SREs, but I was curious about how do security teams who are in this mix, or even the engineering teams who don't have security teams, how do they approach these operational challenges that come their way?
So, see, fundamentally, you have to understand when you're talking about teams, and even if individual developers within teams, you can easily put slot people and teams in different stages, right? So there could be a team which has figured out what they have to build. So the infra is more or less settled. Their pipeline to deploy is more or less settled. Now it's just a question of, can the pipeline keep up with whatever the speed at which they're releasing, right? So here you're thinking of key, if I'm using like a standard one host Jenkins, it will not be enough. Does it have enough RAM? It doesn't have enough cores, or do I need to put this in a cluster, have like worker nodes and all? So that's where you're architecting for that. The throughput is important, and I should have capacity for, maybe even if 30% is idle, it's great because that gives me some headway. So the question is, what can you control and what can you really facilitate? If people are supposed to get access to GitHub, the org GitHub, can you make sure that an org-wide or a team-wide policy that 2FA needs to be enabled, right? If they have identity, a central identity, whether, Google Workspace or a third party or something, right? And you can assign roles or access based on that. Can the security make sure that, hey, these are the baseline things that we will do by default. You don't have to come to us. This will get done provision automatically. And if you say this developer needs elevated access or something like that, then we will slot them into different groups, right? All you can do there is managing the resource from, an access control point of view. Anything else, like they're writing code today, they're trying out a new service, like a big data service or a ML service, which will be very common now, and they're still figuring it out. They most likely need IAM admin access, right? So the best you can do is like get them provision for some, dev test cloud accounts rather than something where everything is already working. Right? If they need S3 access because there'll be large amount of data coming in, facilitate that. If they open the S3 bucket because it's just easy to write the code for it, put a foot down there that, hey, this, if this bucket is found or data is leaked, this is a critical severity, then all this freedom will also go away. Now, I can't give a generic answer here, but what I'm trying to say is, see, when it's about scale for velocity, the only thing a security team should do is throughput. And just like, what we learn, the old adage from firewalls of default deny, you start with a baseline which is fairly strict. And but as soon as the demand comes that, no, this person has to have this kind of access, they're just added to that group, right? I mean, Linux and Unix solved it long ago, how multiple users can share resources on one big server, right? With basic access control, and that works very well. It's easy to put a X and Y matrix to kind of understand, okay, for this type of resource, this access, this type of resource, this access. So it's doable. Now, there may be some situations where it's not, which is where I'm saying that you ship them to a separate cloud account. You tell them that everything is allowed except these 4 or 5 critical issues, because if they are reported by some bug bounty hunter or something, it's a reputational damage. So these we will not allow. And if you're an AWS company, maybe you can do service control policies, but they usually cause more heartache than actually solve problems, right? But it's as simple as that, right? So maybe there you just do external scans or cloud configuration scans every few hours. Something critical shows up, just kind of go teach them that, hey, this is the best way. This one IT security will not allow. That's how I think it can be done. but infra is what security team should control, right? And if you control infra well, you can, without seeming so, you can guide their development.
Yeah. So I think
Yeah,
if I understand what you're saying, essentially the gist of all of this is that try to create maximum impact with least number of changes, and those should be more foundational. So you mentioned access control.
yeah,
But things which are more foundational, which are not explicit on the face changes, but the ones that will still create the maximum impact in terms of actual exploitation on the ground, which might impact the business and are critical to the business. So from that perspective, and all the time ensuring that the business requirement is met, that being the focus
absolutely.
of
Because
the whole
the
thing.
business hired developers to build stuff for them. They hired security folks to kind
not
of
build
keep them
stuff.
in this thing. Yeah, but when it comes down to it, they will go with whatever the developer wants. It's always optimized for developers.
Yeah. I mean, just on a side note, I was telling someone the other day that already security teams are small. We should not be doing things that will downsize the security team further. So, but that was just as a joke. But I think.
Yeah, but you know why it happens? Because again, our learning of access control comes from a point where setting up an access control was a task. It required careful planning and, moving users from one domain or whatever to a different group it was very, very problematic. Now you have the same programmatic controls. I mean, whether you write the programming or not is immaterial, right? So it's very flexible, and that is our output should reflect that flexibility and fluidity.
Yeah. And does it also apply to, you were just talking about access control, but this is also applied to configurational changes for any other systems that are involved in development? That's
what infra as code is all about. Fundamentally, that's what you want to do. That because in accounting terms, right, the infra that you buy is like you just have to kind of get rid of it from your books. It's sitting like a liability. It's not an asset, right? So you get a tax write-off on it for years. So what you want to do is like spend the least amount of effort on that, because having great infra doesn't add value to the end customer. Which is why developers building features are always preferred than security folks who are saying, no, let's be secure at the cost of business. So
at the cost. That is the silent part.
Yeah.
Okay. So the part of we have talked about the scale side of things, but now I also want to talk a little bit from a security team standpoint. And there is the security leadership many times. There are smaller companies where we have a single person looking at the entire security side of things when they are growing fast. There may be a team looking at it, but there will definitely be metrics that we like to measure or report just to show the growth and the posture that is there in terms of security. So what are the key metrics that you would suggest from a security standpoint in such a scenario that we can present, especially at a leadership level, so that they can get a clear idea of the posture, like 2 to 3 things which you would think at this scenario when you're talking about speed, right? Where nothing is priority but businesses. Still, what would be those 2-3 key things which are non-negotiable from your perspective that can be or should be measured when you're working with such?
So I'm going to give a radical answer that usually high velocity teams don't have a security function.
Okay.
Right? They may have security people, but those people's job is just to make sure, that developers are not blocked or slowed down in any case. Right? In that scenario, the only metrics even security folks should look at, right, are what the developers are looking at. And the ones that I always follow are the DORA metrics, right? Given out, I think it mentioned a Google blog once, popularized by the DevOps folks, Gene Kim, there are other folks. There was an author of Accelerate. They talk about it a lot, right? And these are related to release frequency. How often do you release, right? What's your delivery lead time? Which means that from the time you decided that you'll build a feature to when you actually release it in prod.
Yeah.
Right? Release frequency is like how many times do you deploy to prod?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Mean time to recover. In case there's failure, your build failed, you have something problem, a buggy release went out, infra failed, how fast do you recover? Right? And when you are deploying to prod, because you're not testing a lot, right? So you've already made some foundational choices. That means that you are measuring your change failure rate, which means if you have release quickly, but you have many bugs, so you have to recover again. You do MTTR, right? You recover again, make another bug fix release. If that reduces over time, that tells you your assembly line is very healthy. And DORA metrics give you like ideal numbers for teams which are starting out to teams which are doing outstanding DevOps work, right?
Okay.
And you can easily look at those numbers and your numbers, and you can kind of match that. Now, none of this covers security focus metrics. But imagine this. It's like, imagine you're an F1 team. You know, the driver, everything has to be around the driver. Now, why is the driver prioritized over anything else? You could have the best mechanics, the engine mechanic, the tire mechanic, the person who changes the tire. They're all like specialists, right? The fuel person and all that. But the person executing is the driver in F1, right? And what's their North Star? What are they trying to get to? At a championship level, the team and the driver want to have the maximum points. Because that tells you that this car and this driver can drive in different types of conditions, different types of tracks, and beat the others, right? And whatever they learn from that is great. What is the North Star for a business? It's either to get more customers, get more profit from the customers, right? Meet its shareholder obligations. If that is the case, any other metric apart from what is meant for the developers, right? In a DevOps scenario, if you say you do DevOps, any other security metric means nothing. But once you are too big and you have like multiple people reporting to a security function, that is the time you can be like, you know what, I did scanning when, you know, on prod or something, and these are the number of issues I found. These are the number of trainings I did. This is the kind of interventions we did. This is the incident response we did. This is how long it took for us to respond to the incident. All that comes later. But if you don't deploy, then there is no product. Then there is no need for a security function.
So yeah, I think I would like little more clarity on that. So for example, I want to present a scenario where you have teams, you are a small organization and you are the only security person. And of course, you're doing your scanning through the year and all of that is going on. But in this scenario where they are really developing faster and you still don't have extra hands, what are those couple of things that you can actually help the engineering with that ensures that it is secure or decently secure from the perspective of the product?
So there could be any number of things you can help them with. You know, fundamentally, it'll be around guidance, secure by default, right? Or answer some architecture questions that we plan to use the service this way. We want to expose this. Should we accept the risk or not? You will do some calculations. What I'm trying to say is that metric or storing that metric for later has no meaning.
For later has no meaning.
Because there is nothing you can learn from that.
But at the time, is there anything that can actually help in terms of being able to maybe see the issues or?
I would actually say, look at anti-metrics. If you add a scan in the pipeline and the time it takes to release increases, right? That's a no-no. Right?
Yeah, so.
If you generate too many API calls because you're testing the app in production for security and it increases the log bill, that's a no-no, right? What I'm trying to say is that those metrics, the reason you have metrics, the reason you measure is when you want efficiency, right? Here we are saying is that security is at best a supporting role. So the only thing they can do is, are they effective in supporting the real race drivers? who can be measured against the DORA metrics, right? So my answer is that a lot of people will not agree. They'll still want metrics. But what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter in the cloud native world, right? It is immaterial. You can say that, no, I rotated 100 secrets. I wrote like 10 automations. I was able to, do automated incident response because that configuration was wrong. I fixed it without anyone finding about it, right? Unless and until you as an org are trying to improve that function, that we should write error-free or fully secure infra as code, or have all that in place, right? It has no meaning for business. Because for business, anything to do with infra, anything to do with the delivery, right, is a liability. Businesses, right? If they could get away by not writing code, they would do that. Which explains the no code, low code, whatever.
Happy path.
Yeah. And how do they avoid it otherwise in enterprise and mid-market? They go with third parties. They push the liability of the risk on the third party. And now security has this new term called third party risk management, right? Which is nothing but accounting. You're verifying that does the third party have XYZ in a certain way and shape and form, right? So again, I'm saying that if you are in an operational role, not building a security as a function role, security metrics have no meaning. But happy to be, proven wrong if you have some inputs here.
No, so I think for me, the only input was, since you were talking about DORA, I was reminded that, many times aligning with engineering really helps, because both security and engineering are working towards the same business goals. And treating bugs like any other bug, like a security bug is treated same as other bugs. So for example, time to recover, right? So this is one of the metrics. It should also be similarly followed for critical. So if you're patching a critical security issue, the same timeline should also apply to a security bug, rather than, being deprioritized.
Get this, right?
It's
not a security metric then. It is the DORA metric.
Which is okay, it's being called. But the responsibility is more shared than it is, taken up by a single entity. So that's all I think I had.
I think, the question, the way you are posing makes sense. If you are a IC doing security and, it's the time of the year where you have to explain to your boss that, hey, what did you do this year? So yeah, I helped with all these. I get it. But supporting roles are supporting roles, right? Efficiency is never really a question there. Effectiveness is, right? There is no easy way to measure effectiveness in isolation, right? You can attempt to, but in the real deal of things, there is no this thing. Being non-effective is measurable. If you end up spending more money to fix something or to report something, then the feature will make. Then you're not being effective.
Yeah.
Right? And unfortunately, nobody's trained for that. The no kind of things, right? Increasing the time for the build and all that. Because this is still an emerging area as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, cool. I think I just had one last question.
Sure.
And that was more from a business perspective, is while you were talking about a lot of things that, you were talking about awareness, you were talking about other things that can come in beforehand, even before the releases are happening. For small or medium businesses, particularly who are growing really fast, are scaling up, of course, are looking positive. They know they're scaling faster. In 2 years' time, will be in some other place altogether. Where can people start? Where can engineering teams, or essentially these teams, start in terms of security? Like, is it automation? Is it the people side they should be focusing on in terms of starting off and putting the right systems in place? What do you think would be maybe a couple of things that they should start off with?
I'll give you an answer which is rooted in reality, and then I'll give you my opinion. What happens in reality is, if you're a small team and somehow you've managed to hit a place where you think you can reach product market fit, that's the only time you'll get busy, right? Then there is no time wasting on anything. Great architecture, secrets management, security, none of that matters, right? Because not doing that velocity is an existential threat to a small team, right? The only time these teams will want to worry about security, or they even pause to think about security, is because suddenly at some point there's a customer that they have been chasing who's agreed to work with them, and that customer comes back and says, hey, here is my security questionnaire, please fill this up, explain to me all your access control policies, your application security, VAPT policies, and get back to me, right? Then they fill it up from a point of view that they have to fill it up, right? And I have seen this. I have like worked with enough founders to know that that's the only time they do it. And it makes sense, because if there is no business, there is no security. There is no need for security, right?
Yeah.
This is how it actually happens. Only when they hit a certain amount of, I would say, revenue, and in American terms, in terms of funding, usually it's like at Series A. When they have raised the Series A round, you raise a Series A when you have proven that you have usage of the product or the service, you have some revenue from real customers, and you have not many, but at least a few number of deals in place, right? So consider a simple metric like you have $1 million annual revenue, you have at least 10 to 15 customers, and you are raising the money to now prove this new hypothesis, that you can acquire more customers if you could just spend more money on marketing and sales. That is when you are now going after customers who will give you more money annually, and they will send you this questionnaire, right? That is when you hire your first security person. Even at this time, your fundamental this thing is, can I get a scan done from an online this thing, which will give me a report for like $50 or $60, so that I can prove I'm this thing. That's where companies like Hardinize and all have amazing websites. All it does is an SSL check, your email domain check, and that report, if you give with a nice A+ sign, people may or may not accept, right? That's security theater. And usually that's how it operates. Unless and until you're in a regulated industry, you are doing for healthcare or something where you have to be HIPAA compliant, then your cost of delivering the service includes that, right? You'll go on a different path. But most SaaS operates like this. What people should do instead, they will not, because this is like flossing, right? Every time you go to your dentist, they'll be like, yeah, brush twice a day, and at night floss. And you're like, yes, we'll floss, but flossing is so boring. It is such a hard job that most people will not do it. At least I don't do it. I compensate by using an electric toothbrush, right? But
thanks for that tip.
yeah, it's automation, right? It works really well. What people could be doing is solve their cloud infra first. Simply because they've already given away their infra management headache to a cloud provider. That the server will not go down, the disk will not fail, things like that, right? That's that's what you get out of going to a public cloud or something. If your cloud infra is secure for the bare minimum, like you will not allow a public open S3 bucket, then your developer cannot write code to read from that without using signed URLs. So without actually saying it, you got them to agree to a coding standard. You may not have it documented, right? If you say that I will only allow, in the case of AWS, that an IAM role to talk to the server, and in that role you allow access to a database, the RDS or whatever it is, the S3 bucket or something, then you've already established a policy as code culture. So if you solve for cloud infra, and when you have only 1 or 2 servers, it's easy, right? You can just continue in that. And when new people join, they're like, oh, this is the culture, I have to learn this. They will not question it, right? Then you can easily solve for application security. And if you can actually take away the application security configuration bugs, you can focus on the ones that really matter, the business logic issues and all that. You may or may not solve them, it's immaterial. But that's not going to completely delete your cloud. But an infra bug exposed because of an application security issue, like an SSRF or something, and because you were using IAM admin, you can get ransomware very badly, or someone could just like delete everything. Those are existential threats. So solve for cloud infra, then pick up application security, and then third, you take care of access control when you start thinking of the roles that your team has. Because some customer is going to ask, does everyone get access to production database? Then you want to kind of say that, no, the fresher who just started today doesn't get access. Only the senior team gets, right? That's where the RBAC will come in. But if you follow it like that, in the future, you will have a much easier time. But the reality, nobody will follow, right? Because that's not something they're thinking about.
Yeah, but I think thanks for that answer. I think a lot of us who are in control of these security teams or are advising these companies can definitely follow this. I see this as being able to manage the attack surface much better without making too much noise as security, and then, keep calm and do security type of a thing. Okay, it was great having you, Akash, and thanks for answering all these difficult and hard questions for us. So thanks for joining us today.
I'm very glad. Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to the episode.
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining today. Joining us today for Breakpoint, and we will see you all in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Hey folks, that's all we had for today. I hope you enjoyed this one. Visit the podcast page for more such interesting episodes. You will find the speaker suggestions and other details in the show notes below. If you're interested in a security challenge of your own or would like to hear from a specific speaker or team, let me know in the comments below. Lastly, if you liked the episode, please go ahead, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share with others in the community. It always means a lot when you do that. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, Breakpoint signing off.